AJ Pierce at NewEnglandTake.com to get more from the show. It's a Substack, get every episode in your inbox, as well as weekend news updates with headlines from around New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. I want to start off with a big thank you to PorcupineCoffeeRoasting.com, a private membership organization sending me coffee every month, keeping me energized with really good quality specialty coffee. It is fantastic. You sign up and every month Amber sends you a different roast of coffee, and it's worth checking out. PorcupineCoffeeRoasting.com. Use code NETAKE for 15% off of your order. All right, excited this week to be joined for the first time in a while, though I've called into his show many times in recent months, is Ross Connolly, Regional Director for Americans for Prosperity. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, AJ.
Yeah, definitely. And be sure to check out WDEV's Vermont Viewpoint. He hosts there every Wednesday, all sorts of unique opinions from across northern New England and liberty-minded analysis, which I definitely value. And kind of going off of that, so there's this funny thing about being the New England take where I try and pull in northern New England stories and news and politics and things like that, but I keep getting asked every time I speak to people that want to talk about larger trends is, how is New Hampshire this little golden island in the middle of these lefty governments? And I'm always asked, like, how did this happen? It's always, I love the memes whenever there's another map that shows up with New Hampshire just a different color. Just whatever it is, New Hampshire is always a different color. It could be lowest taxes, it could be openness to new business, it could be to anything when it comes to freedom and limited regulation. And New Hampshire is just all alone, unfortunately, with these surrounding states. And I wanted to have Ross specifically on to talk about Vermont. We'll talk about Maine too, but I emailed you leading up to this saying, like, am I crazy? Like, I don't understand what fundamental thing is different culturally necessarily between New Hampshire and these other two states. Everyone likes to say, oh, it's the Free Staters, they did it to us. No, if they're doing their part, but they are not what's really making New Hampshire different. I mean, are you even surprised at this point when you see yet another New Hampshire, just New Hampshire all alone on these maps?
Absolutely not. I mean, I live in New Hampshire, but I work in Maine and Vermont, and we see it all the time. The government policy coming out of whether it's Montpelier or Augusta, and then seeing what's happening in my homestead in New Hampshire. It couldn't be more obvious why there's this big divide across New England. Now, the causes of what has made New Hampshire that hub, the beacon of economic activity and opportunity, and really the entire Northeast. You can go down to New Jersey, New York, some of the other states I cover, that it's the same sort of representation, and it's just very clear. New Hampshire cuts taxes. They try to, restrain spending, have responsible fiscal management of the state. For instance, Vermont has less than half the population of New Hampshire at this point, but they spend $14,000 per person in the state of Vermont. Their annual budget is higher than New Hampshire's. New Hampshire spends about $5,000 per person. So, like, it's just an obvious disparity that at a certain point, the mid 80s, early 90s, Vermont decided to go one way, New Hampshire went another way, and you're seeing the results where New Hampshire protects and expands the New Hampshire advantage. They want growth, they want businesses here, but Vermont, the policies for Montpelier, unfortunately, have been more government intrusion, higher taxes, irresponsible spending, and it shows. Their population is declining, their economy is declining, and there's far less opportunity.
So the stereotype of Vermont has always been this interesting balance where it's they're always the joke is they're crunchy and a bunch of hippies and that they've got like the environmental law school in the country, like one of the top environmental law schools in the country. You got Ben and Jerry's and everything like that. But there's also this rugged, outdoorsy, very reminiscent of a rural New Hampshire and Maine culture there too. And I was kind of surprised when I moved to New Hampshire. I grew up in Maine, and is it similar to New Hampshire where you just have these bubbles where there's these very far left cultural groups? Like you go to your Portsmouth, you go to your Nashuas, Keene, but when you leave these bubbles, it's very much independent. Tradition is more valued. Less government and things like that. Is it similar in Vermont, or is there more of a more cohesive statewide direction that maybe is more moderate and kind of led to this?
Culturally, there's still Vermont and New Hampshire are very similar. I was there last night at an event way up on the eastern edge of Vermont, near Lancaster, New Hampshire. If you go outside of Chittenden County, some of the population centers in Vermont, you see the same type of people, the same mentality. They want to be left alone. They came to Vermont to be left alone if they move from there or move there. There's this rural aspect. They want to protect nature, but they also want, a very sort of libertarian view, very similar to New Hampshire. The problem in Vermont is it would be like if Hanover was the major population center, where the majority of the population of New Hampshire lived in like Hanover or Keene or Portsmouth. Burlington, Chittenden County dominates the state of Vermont. It's where the most population is, and it's where a lot of folks from, New York, Massachusetts over the decades have been moving to get that rural aspect of Vermont, the beautiful nature of Vermont. But they brought their politics with them, and they really, and you're seeing it through the policy this year in the state house that they're trying to do wealth taxes. They're trying to do the same things that New York has done that obviously fails. But the rest of Vermont, if you drive around rural Vermont right now, you will see signs all over the place that says tax revolt, stop 181. Because it was a policy made by, folks in Burlington and Chittenden County, and they just try to ram it down the throats of rural Vermonters, and restricting the way farmers can use their land, that rural people can use their land. And it's created a massive movement. The Facebook group there now has 15,000 people. So when you go outside of the little population center of Vermont, it's almost the same as New Hampshire. They view. I was talking to someone last night. They said they view the river dividing New Hampshire and Vermont as the Berlin Wall. That freedom's on the other side. They want that same type of opportunity and freedom that they have in New Hampshire.
Yeah, and that's been interesting in recent years with some of their state level races that are going on with representatives, with the Republican governor. How Republican is the Vermont Republican governor? Like maybe that's something that'd be interesting to get your take on. It seems like he's doing a lot of very pro-business, lower tax sort of things, but he's still got to kind of work in that bubble that is Vermont. How is it looking at the state government level, and are we seeing trends that are, in our opinion, going in the right way?
I say constantly, thank God for Phil Scott. He is the really the only thing right now standing between Vermonters and higher taxes, wealth taxes, all these crazy ideas that the progressive majority wants to pass, but they lost their supermajority after 2024. 2024, by the way, in Vermont, they had the biggest election swing in 40 years. Uh, of 52 seats at the state level nationally went from Democrat to Republican. 26 of those were in the state of Vermont. There is a massive movement to push back against whether it's the crazy energy policies that are driving up energy costs, the lack of job opportunities. They've had 51% tax increases over the property tax increases over the past couple years. People simply can't afford to live there anymore. And Governor Scott, has this vision to make Vermont more competitive. He's a Vermont guy, he's not going to be, this hardcore conservative. I really think he's one of the best governors in the country because he knows his people. He knows how to, be responsive to the wills of the people, but also has that vision to cast for how Vermont gets out of the hole that it's dug. The problem is he needs friends in the legislature. The Republicans are 2 seats away from a majority in the Senate. They're getting closer in the House. But if you get the Senate, the House is going to have to follow along with just, I call it the common sense caucus. Just having common sense, reducing taxes, finding a way to spend more responsibly. Those are the solutions Vermonters are looking for, and I think we'll probably see that in the election this year. I am most optimistic about the state of Vermont in New England this year.
So the big thing that I've talked about on my show just last week with Dexter, and I actually called into the Vermont Viewpoint this week to talk about are the federal races in New Hampshire and in Maine, which are fascinating case studies. I mean, when we're looking at Vermont, what are the chances of a trend in the right direction for their federal offices?
Unlikely. I'll just say that. I think it's pretty unlikely. I call it the New Hampshire model. Is here in New Hampshire, a lot of people they'll vote for Gene Shaheen, they'll vote for some of these federal offices because they have disagreements with what's happening at the federal level. But when it comes to the state level politics, vote with your pocketbook. And you see it constantly. If you've ever been to like a ballot recount in New Hampshire, I've done it a couple times. You can see the odd trends that voters do. But a lot of them have this Yankee fiscal conservative focus at the state level, and they know the current majority in New Hampshire is doing just that. They're growing New Hampshire's economy. They're cutting taxes. They're lessening the burden of the affordability crisis nationwide for the people of New Hampshire. So creating that same type of model, because 2024, you had 70+% of the state of Vermont turnout for Bernie Sanders. You had 75% plus turnout and vote for Phil Scott. So they're going to jump around, but our message is you have to hold these state level people accountable because they've been in power too long. It's been over 20 plus years that they've had a majority in the state house with no counter message because in Vermont, you have to be invited to testify on a bill, for one thing. And they have refused to take any of these solutions that the Republicans have put forward off of the wall in committee. So they haven't even had hearings on the issues that Vermonters actually want to see change on, whether it's Global Warming Solutions Act, Clean Heat Standard, property taxes. The refusal to even hear out the other side. It's time for change there. Republicans controlled 1854 until the mid 80s. And since then, the Democrats have largely dominated the state level politics. And, there was a few years where Republicans gained it back. But what do you have to show? By what measure has Vermont gotten better under their leadership?
Yeah, that kind of makes me curious on the party level. So New Hampshire is notorious for our our leader of the state Democratic Party, who is still has me blocked on X, and I'm probably you too if I had to guess. What's the Democratic Party as an organization look like in Vermont? Is it fairly well structured, and that's part of the reason why they've been very successful, especially with their federal races and still being able to keep a majority, or is it something more at the grassroots level?
They're certainly very well funded. There's the Bernie machine. There's lots of groups in Vermont that want to, continue pushing this progressive policy, not hearing out the other side. We get attacked pretty consistently in Vermont, which we say is fine. If you want to come at us with personal attacks and stuff, that's fine. What we care about is actually making Vermont affordable and competitive so that the people of Vermont have better well-being, have higher wage growth, that it's better and easier to live in the Green Mountain State. They've had no answer whatsoever for that. For any of our actual policy initiatives, there has been no response. They just come with, billionaires and money. They claim we were spending millions of dollars. You can look at the public records. We are a bootstrap organization in the state of Vermont, and it is powered by the locals. Like we don't go out and tell people this is the way or the highway. We get the feedback from the local representatives, the local people, and that's what's been shown is what's changing the state. Those 15,000 people in that Facebook group, they were able to speak up in a way. They showed up to the state house and they were able to stop not just a bill from being passed, but in action, something that had already become law and was trying to be implemented. So our message to Vermonters is get involved, speak up, speak out, and you can actually really change things, even with the progressive majority right now, because it's seeming like that bill, that law is going to be repealed, or at least the worst parts of the law will be repealed because of those people.
I keep asking about the Democrats because I know your enemy is very important in order to shape your narrative as a conservative with how far you can take things, or a libertarian, whatever side of you may be. But one more on that point is, I feel like a lot of in New Hampshire, a lot more of the progressives are tamped down by so many of the more moderate Democrats that are here in the state. Like we have a Democrat, Nashua, which is one of the more left-leaning areas in the House, outright calling Andrew Volinsky's income tax concept as a fail, not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. I don't like Jason Osborne. This is one thing we agree on. Is literally what she said. Is there that middle Democrat movement in Vermont? Because it always comes like that. Once again, going back to the stereotype, it's the progressives really have taken a stronger hold to the West compared to what we have here in New Hampshire, and as we've also seen to a level up in Maine over the previous 10, 20 years. Is there that middle left in Vermont that at least the Republicans are going to be able to side with, or are they just way out to the left?
There absolutely is. And just from our perspective, we don't care what letter is next to your name. If the Democrats in the majority were to come around on some of these issues, be more common sense, don't try to push these tax increases onto the backs of Vermonters who can barely afford basic goods right now. We would work with them. We supported some Democrat regulatory reforms over the past 2 years that were signed into law, carve-outs to the certificate of need law, things like that. And we would be happy to do more if they just were willing to see common sense. Just look at the results of what's happening in New Hampshire compared to Maine and Vermont. It couldn't be more obvious. They're all culturally similar states. Vermont or Maine and New Hampshire, similar populations. There is an obvious solution here. It's reducing what you're doing, reducing spending, reducing the size and scope of government. And we have seen average middle of the road Democrats. We did an event last summer, and we had some members of the Democratic Party there. And after we were talking about the affordability problems and the vision for the solutions that we have been proposing for 4 years now, and the governor's been proposing for many years now. And after the event concluded, a lady came up to me. She was the chair of the local Democratic committee, and she said to me, whispered to me, I agree with you a lot more than the progressives in the legislature. And that's really resonating across the state. It doesn't matter your party. We're telling all Vermonters become part of this movement to save the state of Vermont. Because the way that it's going, everyone's going to leave. Every person that grew up in Vermont is going to leave. You hear it from every single person there. My kids are leaving. My family's leaving because you can't afford to live there. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, are they having the same housing zoning issues over there as we're seeing in New Hampshire and Maine? It seems like obviously they must because it's got to be part of the equation too. But a lot of, especially what I've seen through speaking to people, a lot more of the issue in our side of the border. Yes, we have a tremendous property tax and local cost drivers issue here in New Hampshire. There's no way around it. Anyone that says otherwise is a moron because it's the money's going somewhere and ain't going to my pocket. I'm sure it's not going to. I'm sure some of our administrators are making fairly good salaries, but not enough to justify the tremendous impacts that we've been seeing. Are they having the same housing availability crisis that we're seeing over here?
I would argue it's worse. One, I mentioned the property tax issue. 51% property tax increases is staggering. Vermont has the lowest GDP of any state in the country. So, going after having that's on the backs of if you're a farmer, one of the key, industries in the state of Vermont is agriculture. If you're a farmer, you have to own a lot of land. You get a 51% tax increase on your land. What are you going to do? You drive around rural Vermont, it's just nothing but closed businesses in their beautiful little downtowns and for sale signs in front of farms. So there's the property taxes. There's also this thing called Act 250. It is some of the most onerous environmental regulations for building in the entire country. It is absolutely ridiculous, the burden of the regulations that any builder has to go through to be able to build new homes. In Act 181, which I was talking about earlier, that actually tacked on even more onto those rural farmers. So it's government created. In New Hampshire, I can understand it a little more. It's a big problem, but it's because New Hampshire has become this beacon across the Northeast, and we have tons of people, and we have stupid neighbors that are passing wealth taxes. So their entire top tax bracket is leaving the state of Massachusetts, soon to be Maine, and they're buying up, the top level property for cash in New Hampshire. It, it's a difficult problem. I think New Hampshire's problem will be solved in the next few years with a lot of the bills they've been passing to ease regulations, make clear timelines so that you can build and increase that supply of housing. But it's really between the property rights issue and the property tax issue in Vermont. It is like those lawn signs I've seen around the state. It is a tax revolt. People cannot deal with the burden that the government's putting on them.
Yeah, it's totally a situation where there's these idealists that want to have these things. We need to have all these programs, these sort of things to protect the people that need to be protected and things like that. Like you live in New York where they've got New Manhattan's tax money going to Albany or something like that, and that is not the case in Vermont for sure. You don't see Maine's. I see the parallels big time between Maine and Vermont having the same exact issues with the overregulation, for decades, the tremendous amount of businesses leaving, whether it's more global changing in manufacturing. Definitely was a lot more the issue over in Maine with the lumber and paper industries and things like that were huge. You go to some ghost towns like Rumford, Maine and things like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened here? It's like, oh yeah, the mill left. And I went to Berlin, New Hampshire several months ago for the first time, and I'm like, oh, this is probably what it was like 30, 40 years ago because they actually have a working manufacturing operation instead of that failure. I mean, is there a lot of synergy that you see also between the issues that Maine and Vermont are seeing?
Absolutely. I think it's a little it's very similar in what's happening between the two states. I think with Vermont, it's just these ideological bubbles people find themselves in. If you're in Chittenden County, you don't know the plight of the average Vermonter. You don't know what's happening, in these little towns across the state, which is the vast majority of Vermont. It's the same thing in Maine. Southern Maine is just dominated by these high wealth people that moved in, from out of state. They brought their values with them, their political values with them. And there's an enormous divide there between southern Maine and northern Maine. CD2 in Maine is the really only Trump district in all of New England. Um, but then at the southern tip, CD1, it is some of the most progressive ideologues in the country. So that's a divide that is just totally unsustainable. But they just double down on these policies. It's almost like, again, I think they just don't understand what is happening to average people, and how their policies and ideologies are failing because they only talk to their friends and neighbors who agree with them. Because I mean, looking at what I talked about the 51% property tax increase. The progressives in the state of Vermont, in the state house this year, tried to pass a property tax increase. Like, how does that make any rational sense to anyone that has talked to anybody in that state? Because I hear it constantly from average people. The event last night we had in Orange County, we had the biggest turnout they've had in a decade, the chair told me. And it was people from all across the political spectrum. It wasn't just Republicans, it was independents, it was Democrats that feel like they're being completely ignored in Montpelier. Very similar in the state of Maine, just the way that the progressive politicians in Augusta have been ramming through some of the most progressive and, I hate that word because it's really regressive because they're putting their economy on the back track. But some of the most extreme policies that you could come up with this year, even though the Republicans only lost the House in Maine by 50 votes statewide, but their opinion apparently doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, we got to write off anyone, even if it's one of the big nationwide issues. Is literally half the country voted for the party in power now, barely over 50%. If you're gonna villainize the people that voted for them, it's like, guess what? They're the ones you need to have vote for your candidates. Not a great political move, in my opinion, but I'm just some guy on the radio. What do I know? All right, we're right about out of time here, Ross. If people want to learn more about what Americans for Prosperity are up to, especially if you're over in Vermont or Maine, what should they do?
You can visit greenmountainprosperity.com. You can also check out americansforprosperity.org, AFP Vermont on Facebook. We're really committed to making this happen. That Vermont is worth saving, Maine is worth saving. The people are going to be the ones that drive that change. We are just the catalyst to empower them to do that. So we're doing that throughout the summer. We're going to be bringing attention to average Vermonters and average Mainers about the voting records of these politicians that are driving up costs, driving up the uncompetitiveness of both of these states and setting the people back decades if things don't change. So, I wish every state had that 400 person legislature that New Hampshire has, because I think that's really what protects the state of New Hampshire. But there is nothing really that different between these three states. Use some common sense. Look at what New Hampshire's doing, or Utah, or the Carolinas, or Florida, any of these states doing well, and you will see a roadmap to bringing success and opportunity to your populace. And that's what they can do. There's nothing holding them back from doing that.
Thank you, Ross Connolly, Regional Director for Americans for Prosperity. Lots of helpful information. Hopefully that breaks down some of the questions people keep asking me and I pretend to know the answer to. So go check out all that, definitely. Be sure to check out newenglandtake.com is a Substack. You can support the program over there. Big thank you to WKXL for picking up the show. Saturdays, 8:30 a.m. GraniteGrok.com every Saturday on their podcast feed. And Concord TV. If AJ at newenglandtake.com, if you have any opinions on what we got going on over here, or any of the guests, or if you want to join the show, shoot me a message there for sure, and we'll talk to you soon.